All right, we're going to get started. My name is Wendy Cho. I'm the Content and Outreach Senior Manager at Acterra, and welcome everybody to Cultivating Solutions, our fall lecture series for 2023. We will be talking about the sustainability of our food system and how we can improve it and enhance it, and we will also be talking about how that impacts climate change. So I'm really pleased today to hear from Ania Korsunska. Her title is Rooted in Sustainability, the Power of Urban Gardening. And as we get started, please feel free to say hello in the chat. You can drop in your name and pronouns and your organization and location. I'm going to start with a little background on Acterra. So Acterra has been around since 1970. We were founded on Earth Day. We are an environmental nonprofit that serves the San Francisco Bay Area. We have a mission of bringing people together to create local solutions for a healthy planet. And we encourage people to reduce their carbon footprints, and this can be done through a lot of actions on the individual or household level. So we believe there's lots of progress to be made there. And we're also interested in the broader impacts when we move the needle on policy and advocacy and call for stronger protections on climate in that policy arena. So those are some of the things that Acterra is doing. You can read more about us online at acterra.org. How we are combating climate change at Acterra, we have 4 pillars to our work. The first is beneficial electrification, where we are encouraging people to switch off of fossil fuel devices towards things like electric vehicles and also home electrification. We also have a pillar devoted to food. Specifically, we are reducing the animal products in people's diet or reducing food waste. Those are the 2 primary directions of our food pillar. And then we have an education pillar, which the lecture series is a part of. We work with middle school students, we work with high school students, and we have the also college students that we work with. And we have this lecture series, which is for general public education on the climate and important issues. And then we have a 4th pillar on advocacy, which I already mentioned. We are building coalitions throughout the Bay Area, and we're part of many groups. 2 of the coalitions that we are currently heading are the Electric Vehicle Charging for All Coalition, and we are also heading Homegrown Bay Area, which is a food sustainability related coalition. So more about our education pillar, as I alluded to earlier, we have several different components. The Youth Be the Change is a program which is dedicated to middle school teachers and students, providing them with free curriculum to enhance understanding of climate change problems and climate change solutions. We also have this public lecture series, which is dedicated to enhancing public knowledge about the most pressing kinds of issues relating to climate change today. We also have a high school and college program called Acterra's Student Ambassadors Program, where we're really teaching advocacy skills, things like how to respond at public meetings and provide public comments, and how to raise your voice in environmental issues in your community. So we're really excited to bring to you 2 more events in our fall lecture series, Cultivating Solutions. The next one is going to be October 17th, which will be virtual on Zoom, called Understanding Food Loss and Waste. We're really excited to have Selena Mao from ReFed and also Dr. Lisa K. Johnson, who is an expert on food waste. And they'll be drilling down into some data, really exciting findings that we're learning about food waste and food loss. We also have an exciting event in person on November 12th. This will be a film screening of the documentary film, The Smell of Money, which is about factory farming and environmental justice and how residents are being impacted in North Carolina. It's a really fascinating film. So I highly recommend you mark your calendars for these 2 dates. We also hope you'll join us for some upcoming events. For example, we have on October 5th, new models and insider tips for going EV from 7 to 8 p.m. This will be a really exciting look and exploration of some newer models that are coming out in 2024. everything from trucks to scooters, and to fit a whole variety of lifestyles. So please join us for that. We also have part of our Green at Home workshop series on solar rooftops. You can join us to learn about the benefits of rooftop solar on Tuesday, October 10th from 6 to 7 p.m. Again, this will be on Zoom. And you can learn about discounts that make rooftop solar more affordable and other local programs to support you in your home electrification journey. And we also have a really cool thing coming up. It's a dietary challenge on October 23rd. Join us for 4 weeks of eating lower on the food chain while still enjoying healthy, delicious, exciting food. And Acterra will provide plenty of resources and support for you along the way. So you can sign up at acterra.org/plentifulfall. I wanted to say a very sincere thank you to our series underwriters, Mary and Clinton Gilliland, and Armand and Eliane Newkermans for making our lecture series possible. Thank you so much. And we have amazing partners as well. We'd like to say thank you to The Foster, which is an amazing site in Palo Alto, showcasing the work of Tony Foster, and Acterra's Green Team Network, which is a professional network for people in the Bay Area who are interested in sustainability. As always, we very much appreciate community support. So if you are enjoying the programming that you're receiving for free, we hope that you'll also express your appreciation through a donation at acterra.org/donate now. And just a little logistical note, we will be collecting your questions and we will take them at the end of the presentation. So please drop your questions in the Q&A feature, not the chat, in Zoom to ask your own question, or you can also upvote another question that has already been asked. So we please invite you to ask plenty of questions. I know our speaker will love to see them. And on that note, I would also like to ask, if you don't mind, as you're introducing yourselves in the chat, please tell us if you have a lot of experience with gardening or not as much. And that will help our speaker also kind of determine how to customize her presentation. Thank you so much. And also, before you go, please fill out our survey. It will pop up at the end of the meeting on Zoom. And here's also the link. We'll stick it in the chat. It's bit.ly/rooted-survey-sep, like for September. Okay, now on to the actual excitement for today. It is my great pleasure to welcome Ania Korsunska. She is an advocate for urban gardening and sustainability through her consultancy, Peas of Mind Gardens, and other outlets tied to data science, research, communications, and climate action. As the community lead for Climate Vine, she utilizes data to help cultivate a community of climate experts and create more opportunities for collaboration. She is the founder of Zemlia, a startup providing people with data-driven tools to facilitate their journey towards sustainability. And she's nearing the end of her PhD in information science and technology at Syracuse University. So with that, Ania, please take it away.
Hi, thank you so much, Wendy. And I do see a lot of responses already in the chat. Love to see a good variety of experienced people, experienced but maybe not very successful, very common sentiment there. Keep dropping those in the chat and I'll try to keep an eye on it. But yeah, keep drop your questions in the Q&A. I'm really excited to have this discussion after the presentation. So I will share my screen and hopefully that works. Perfect. Okay, so let's get started. So yeah, so the talk is the power of urban gardening. And Wendy did a great job already introducing me, so I won't dive too much into my CV, but just kind of to highlight that I'm bringing together kind of these three areas of my experience and kind of life passion of gardening, data, and climate, and kind of be switching between those hats throughout the presentation and through the Q&A as well. So as I was planning this talk, I really wanted to kind of see how best to introduce this topic. And there's so much to cover that I think a lot of these aspects could be their own talk on their own. So I'm going to start with my own gardening journey because I think in order to even talk about the impact of some of these sustainability solutions that they can have, we do need scale. We do need a lot more people gardening. And I think going through my experience will hopefully be helpful in combating a lot of those roadblocks that people set for themselves of not knowing enough or knowing not having the right skill set or having enough space. These are very common roadblocks that I hear from clients and friends and anybody who's in the garden space of you killed one tomato plant, like you cannot garden. That's just simply not true. So hopefully they're going through my own gardening experience will help set the context for where I'm coming from, but also kind of help maybe combat some of those stereotypes about who can garden and who is this for. And then we'll talk about more broadly about sustainability and how that all fits together. So this is me. So I grew up in Ukraine, and I spent my summers in Western Ukraine in the mountains, in the Carpathian Mountains, helping my grandparents tend to goats, pick potato bugs off of their potatoes. We're a big potato culture. And picking potato bugs, I think, really made me in tune with gardening and just being grateful for how much work it is to grow food, and how important it is, because a lot of communities in Ukraine still they grow their own food and that's all they have to live off through the winter. So that's kind of my background, and I think a lot of Ukrainians kind of have that desire to grow food in their genes and their genetics. It's called the breadbasket of Europe for a reason. It's very rich in fertile soil. It's about 70% agricultural, and just shameless plug for my land here, of some of the positive aspects. I know Ukraine's been in the news for many reasons, unfortunately, in the past year or so, but just highlighting its importance as an agricultural nation, and kind of that's where I'm coming from in my background of kind of knowing that and having that heritage of growing food, and just had the importance of having homegrown food to just survive, but also to be close to nature and really close to where your food comes from. So I didn't actually start gardening until I was pretty far into adulthood. In 2014 is the first time that I owned land. We bought our house. We had this backyard. I looked at this lawn and I was like, I am not going to mow this lawn. Maybe some of you can relate to that. So the Ukrainian genetics in me woke up, and we were like, okay, let's plan some stuff. Without a very good plan, though, we did our best. So we did some tilling. We put some weed blockers. We got some free wood chips delivered onto our front lawn, which actually killed off the grass for probably forever. And started planting things, but planted pretty badly, very, very far spaced apart, because you can see in the picture here. Mostly we were growing mulch because we were following the seed directions of spacing, which we can talk about a little bit deeper in the Q&A if that's something of interest. But basically, I didn't know what I was doing. The first garden. But we had a garden. We transformed that yard into a huge garden. Probably could have done much better with spacing, but it was our first time. And we were fairly successful. So grew a lot that first year, but we had a lot of problems with the soil issues since it was an in-ground garden. We had a lot of pests, water issues. We grew things we didn't eat, which is a huge learning for me of don't grow like 7 jalapeno plants if you don't eat spicy peppers, which is just a learning, I think. And every year, I think, is a learning opportunity in the garden, but especially your first year, you're learning the space, you're learning the ecosystem or lack thereof. So that was our first year. Second year, installed a watering system, introduced trellises, so some of the vertical gardening aspects that we'll talk about a little later. Amended the soil, started root crops, which is really great, again, speaking to my Ukrainian background. Introduced netting and plant supports, and had a vicious war with squirrels that continued for another couple of years of them just stealing all of your crops, but a little bit better. So every year, a little bit of improvement. And then we moved. So we had to leave all of that behind. But once we got to our new place in Syracuse, had an opportunity to start from scratch. So at this point, we decided to go with raised beds. So got cedar from Home Depot, made a plan, got soil delivered. So we had a lot more control over the soil, which is incredibly important. That's probably the most important thing in your garden is what kind of soil it is, making sure that it's very rich in compost. So a good mix of topsoil and compost is what we went for here as a baseline, and then amending that with our own compost. So built 4 huge raised beds. So there were 16 by 4 feet, and about 2 feet tall, I believe. And 2019 was a pretty successful year, and it's interesting to compare. This was a much smaller garden than I had in the previous yard that I had the in-ground garden in, but we had so much more success because of the control of the soil, because of the much better watering system that I set up. There was soaker hoses that were in the raised beds, and started to introduce organic pesticides and just tighter planting, which meant less time weeding, less time actually fighting a lot of the pests and the diseases that actually tend to attack plants that are isolated, which is an interesting learning for me. And then 2020 hit, and I think the entire country kind of turned into gardening. And I was the same, so I had a lot of time on my hands. So I did a formal plan through software, and we were kind of overwhelmed. It was a flood harvest, is how I describe it. We were overwhelmed with tomatoes, strawberries, zucchini. I was actually zucchini bombing my neighbors, in which I was just dropping zucchini into mailboxes in my neighborhood because I had 20 of them a day, and I did not know what to do with that much zucchini. But it was incredible that I mean, they're very large beds, but it's a fairly small sized garden. Speaking of like what we could do with the previous yard that we had, but we were incredibly successful that year. And I wasn't alone. So the COVID-19 pandemic created over 18 million new gardeners, mostly in the millennial age group, which was a 65% increase, which is huge over the previous year, which brought the total amount of Americans gardening to about 71.5 million, according to this study. But I think we need so much more. So part of the advocacy that I'm trying to engage in is calling for almost everyone, that even if you don't have a backyard or don't have a huge outdoor space, you can still grow your own food. And there's so many benefits for both yourself, your community, and the planet. And it's wonderful to see that this good came out of the pandemic, is that a lot of people discovered that, but we need so much more. Another great thing that I learned through having your own garden is you can grow things you've never heard of or never eaten. For example, cucuzzi squash. I grew about 5 of these. The biggest one is in the video right there. Is that it was 4 foot 2 inches, which actually I grew to be too long, and it was inedible at that point, which is another learning experience. But just things that you've never eaten before, and things that you can grow, like cucamelons or lemon cucumbers, which are cucumbers that look like lemons, and cucamelons are cucumbers that look like tiny melons, like watermelons, which is crazy. There's just so much variety, and you can't buy these things in the store, but you can buy the seeds for fairly cheap and just experiment. In 2022, we actually moved to Japan, so I lost a season. But 2023 is the birth of Peace of Mind Gardens, which is a balcony garden, and in Portland, Oregon is where we are now. And you can follow along on Instagram and Peace of Mind Gardens to see the actual install. These are just some screenshots. But we moved to Portland. I wanted a huge south-facing balcony, was my only requirement for an apartment. And we really made the space cozy. We put down flooring, we put down elevated raised beds. So they have a bottom, and they're on legs. So they're high up off the ground. And we put in 4. So they're just 2 by 4. They're fairly small, but we put in 4 of these on our balcony. So the entire balcony is taken up by these beds. And it's been a fantastic experience of just seeing the thousands of balconies around us. And you can see here in the video on the right, that's my garden. You can actually see on I-5 as you're driving into Portland. If you look up into a tall building in the south waterfront, you can actually see it from the highway. And it was just incredible to me that we can grow so much in such a little space in an area that otherwise is full of cement, devoid of pollinators and otherwise just life, just concrete jungle. We're able to grow so much, and all the other balconies are so empty, and it's incredibly sad to me. So this is the 12th floor. Very limited space. It's a completely new ecosystem. There was nothing here before except for concrete. There's no water supply, so you can't install a watering system. It's full sun, and I mean absolutely full sun. Things actually burned just because there was absolutely no bushes or no trees protecting the garden, which is an absolutely new experience for me. There was no pollinators to begin with. So in the first couple months, I had to hand pollinate most of the plants, which was a very new experience. But we're still able to get full meals out of this garden. So we're able to get tons of lettuce, tomatoes, kale, chard, cucumbers, strawberries, peppers, again, cucamelons, which I've been a big fan of, spinach, peas, basil. So we made our own pesto. And this is a balcony. So this is not a huge yard. This is not, I didn't need to till, didn't need to remove anything, just ordered some beds, put some soil down, put some seeds, and there's a garden. So out of all of that experience, if I were to kind of isolate what I've learned, here's a couple slides through my top tips. So space and design. So no space is too small. And I do really mean that. Even if you don't have a balcony, there are some options for indoor gardens. That you can grow your own food and still get that benefit. Comfort and beauty are important. So a lot of people, when they start out, they get tomato plant that they forget about then, and then they're like, oh, I don't have a green thumb, and they give up. But it is important to make the space beautiful and comfortable, so accessible, so you can move around easily, you can access it. You want to go into the garden, and there's always something happening there. So always something to look at, something to harvest. So thinking about that is incredibly important. This is what I work with clients on through my consultancy. New ecosystems take time to establish. So it did take time. It took a couple of months for the first bee to arrive in our garden. And that was something that I didn't even know if it would happen. So anytime you're starting something new, you will have failures, and working through that is something that you just need to accept. Hardiness zones are helpful. They're these USDA zones of what can be grown where based on the climate. They are helpful, but they're not always helpful, especially considering climate change and the fact that they are changing. And also just within a city or a neighborhood, it does really depend on where you are. So my 12th floor balcony is kind of a separate ecosystem than even a community garden within Portland, even close by. So they're good to know about, but they're not always helpful. So don't take them as the absolute rule. Don't be afraid to go big. So as I said, a lot of people start out with just like a tomato plant, and then they get bored because nothing happens with the tomato plant for about 40 to 60 days. They forget about it, it dies, and then they give up. So maybe not big. I always go big, but at least starting out with some variety and making a plan is incredibly important. And then just adjust and iterate and see what works for you, what works for your lifestyle, and adjust from there. Which brings me to the second point of just defining your goals and success measures is incredibly important. Are you trying to support your family through your garden? Do you want to eat full meals? Do you want to store food for the winter? Do you want to just have fun and exercise and get outside more? Or are you trying to, trying to mitigate climate change through your garden? Like, what are your actual goals? How do you know whether you've been successful, and how do you define that is incredibly important. And a lot of people start gardening without really having that in mind, and then they feel like they failed. But I'm like, how do you know if you failed if you never established what success is? And which relates to the second point of gardens should bring you joy. So grow what you love, grow what you will eat, grow beautiful things. It should be a space that brings you, I love puns, so that's why my garden's called Peace of Mind gardening. But it should bring you kind of a relief from the stress of everyday life. It should be a joy and not something else you need to worry about and stress out about. And there are ways to reduce, the amount of time you need to spend in your garden. You can automate things. You can adjust certain things so you can actually enjoy it rather than just be stressed out about. There is a way. Experiment, break the rules, especially when it comes to spacing or putting things together or breaking the rules of how late you can plant something. Just There's so many rules that I've broken and been successful that I kind of love that. It's like finding a little like secret in the garden that like your garden will allow you to break certain rules. So experiment. And plants will die. Sometimes plants that you've grown forever will die and you will not know why. It is not your fault. Sometimes there's pests. Sometimes something happened with the soil. Some things are out of your control, and accepting that some plants will die and actually having some plants as like your scapegoat plants that like have backup plans in case your like normal plants die is a good plan. And it's not always your skill, and try not to take that personally, and try again and just see every year as a learning opportunity. Across the three most important aspects of water, soil, and plants, just some basic tips, but would love to, if we want to dig deeper in this in the Q&A, let me know. So setting up a watering system is really a great way to reduce the time spent in the garden and lugging water if you can. Looking into slow watering systems, adjusting to the weather, collecting rainwater, these are all fantastic solutions. And do not water during the day. For goodness sakes, I see people watering in the heat of the day. It will burn your plants. Water in the morning and in the evening when the plants are not in direct sunlight. For soil is so complicated and people get overwhelmed with trying to understand what kind of soil to have. But you just start basic and then improve from there. So a basic mix of topsoil and compost will get you some success. And then you can think about, balancing the structure and water retention and permeability and nutrients and all of that stuff. But start basic. Just if something is so complex that it prevents you from starting, start with what you know will work to a certain extent, and then again, learn and adjust from there. Plants, so grow what you'll eat, but kind of contradictory. Also grow what you've never eaten before. You never know. Things that are not readily available in the store are sometimes really fun, and kind of get you again a reason to go into the garden and explore. And maybe if you have kids, educate them on new vegetables or fruits they've never eaten before. Plan based on days to maturity. So just all you need to know when you look at seed packets is how long will this take to mature, and then you'll know when to plant it. So you can look at calendars, you can look at planners, you can look at hardiness zones, but like a lot of it will just depend on how long does this plant need to get to maturity. Companion plants are fantastic based on nutrient needs and size. So I follow a system of planting very densely, but still making sure that I'm not putting the nutrients at risk of putting too many plants that need the same nutrients together. And again, have backup plants and have diversity for yourself, for your own sanity, and for all your pollinators and other bugs in your garden. Speaking of which, so pests and diseases are a huge problem. They'll be a problem in every garden. Go into the garden every day, catch these problems early, try to use preventative measures like blocking or other barriers, remove sick plants. Sometimes you just need to let some plants go if they're too far gone. Use natural methods. There's a lot you can do with baking soda and vinegar or organic pesticides. Don't have to use chemicals unless you really, really need to. And watch for natural predators. Sometimes you don't even need to intervene. Sometimes nature will actually take care of it for you. Pollinators are incredibly important. Obviously, a lot of plants will need that have a female and a male flower. You need the pollen to be transferred. In some plants, it's easier than others, like tomatoes. In something like cucumbers, where they're actually pretty far apart, or zucchini flowers that actually open at different times and just make it really difficult for you. If you don't have bees or other pollinators, you can do it by hand. I use it like a little paintbrush when I need to. But that's really important to attract them with different flowers, or just planting those plants that will attract pollinators, and then being patient. Even on the 12th floor of an urban balcony, they will eventually find the plants up here. And letting some things go to seed is an incredibly important thing I learned this year. Of the pollinators actually preferred the basil plants or the mint plants that I let go to seed, which just means that you let the plant stop producing what you're actually looking for. So like the leaves of the basil plant, and go to seed, so they'll produce a flower. Technically, you're supposed to try to prevent that because you're a good gardener and you want to get more harvest, but letting something goes to seed brings pollinators in and helps your other plants. So that is a good thing to keep in mind. So that is my experience. Just really wanted to set that context, and would love if there's things that people are interested in, drop them in the Q&A. Would love to dig into more kind of practical advice. And now we'll move into a little bit more theoretical of how urban gardens and all of this fits into the bigger picture. So we talked a little bit about elevated raised beds, so the beds with a bottom, and usually they're on legs, so they're off the floor. Raised beds and in-ground gardens, but there's a lot of different ways that you can garden, depending on your space, your budget, your desire for how many plants you want. So container gardens are a good idea of literal having pots. Vertical gardens make use of little space, so you can do things like strawberries or even lettuce, maybe on a smaller balcony where you can't have any sort of raised bed. You can grow vertically. Hydroponics are great for indoor or outdoor use, and they're basically systems that use water and nutrients, and they have a lot of options nowadays for these towers that you can buy and have in your house, even with LEDs, so you don't even need to have a balcony at all. You can grow food just within your own house. A lot of other things that we didn't really cover here that are more on a larger scale, but important to mention, of green roofs, whether it's on your home or an office building or an apartment building, of just getting that just general, whether it's flowers or grass, getting that green covering is incredibly important in this context. Alternative lawns, so thinking either replacing your grass with a native grass species or something alternative like creeping thyme or something else that is easier to maintain, takes less water, maybe is better for the ecosystem. You don't have to mow it a lot of the times. Not very common in the US, but something to look into if you have a lawn. Maintaining green canopies, so maintaining trees in neighborhoods or even in your backyard, of providing that different levels of ecosystem for different types of animals and insects. Community gardens have a fantastic role to play. Unfortunately, there's not enough of them in the US or probably around the world. I know in Portland, there's a 2-year waiting list to get to a community garden. So what I really wish is all of those people on those waiting lists could at least start gardening, whatever space they have, instead of waiting for a larger space, thinking that they need a huge space to grow anything, which is just simply not true. But a really important to talk about community gardens in this context as one of the solutions. And obviously wildflower meadows, native plants, that can be a whole separate lecture on the role of those in supporting ecosystems and pollinators, but important to mention here as well. And happy to have more of a discussion in any of these. In any choice that you choose, I think it's important to consider how to garden responsibly to make sure that you're helping the ecosystem rather than intentionally or unintentionally causing some harm. So some things that you can think of taking, like regenerative agriculture methods, and applying it to a smaller scale in certain types of gardens. So no-till or low-till methods. So minimizing soil disturbance to prevent soil destruction, enhancing water retention, reducing carbon emissions. So I did till my first garden, so that was one of my mistakes. We didn't know. We bought a tiller to try to get the grass to die off, but that is a regenerative method, so that is preferred to do no-till or low-till. Crop rotation, so rotating crops or plants year to year to just improve soil health, reduce pest problems, because some pests can overwinter in the same spot and be ready to eat your tomato plant the next year. Prevent using cover crops to prevent soil erosion and suppress weeds, enhance soil fertility, and again, using companion planting is a great idea. For fertilizers, using organic fertilizers, composting, avoiding over fertilizing, and in that case, maybe doing some soil testing to see what kind of soil you're working with, and do you actually need to fertilize. So opting for less is more. Again, using organic pest control or natural predators, using physical barriers, natural weed control, such as cover crops, again, are great options how to garden responsibly, and protecting ecosystems. So avoiding planting invasive species of plants, opting for native plants, introducing flowers, diversity, conserving water, and providing habitats and access to water for birds and different insects. So bringing the sustainability angle a little bit more to the forefront, here's a bunch of topics that I think we can talk about in terms of urban gardens and sustainability. And I think each of these could be its own hour lecture, and I'm definitely not an absolute expert in all of these. So I just wanted to cover a couple of them, and happy to kind of dive deeper and have more of a discussion about some of them. But I am aware that I'm going to go quite quickly through some of them, but they're all incredibly important in this context. So the first one that's important to mention is the urban heat island effect, which occurs when cities replace a lot of the natural land cover with dense concentrations of pavement and buildings and other surfaces that absorb and retain heat, which tends to make cities hotter than places like suburbs or rural or parks, just areas with more greenery. And obviously, this is a reason to have more parks and more trees in cities. But that's kind of outside of your control as an individual. But you do control, your balcony or your yard or your community space. If you can increase the diversity and just the amount of vegetation, you can actually at scale. Obviously, you need more than just like one tomato plant, but you can actually make your area cooler through increasing vegetation, through deflecting radiation, and the releasing more moisture into the atmosphere through the plants. I was reading a study from Miami comparing a couple of different neighborhoods just the other day that was saying that there's some areas in the city that can be up to 8 degrees cooler than others, just because of the concentration of plants. And this also tends to correspond to, is it an affluent neighborhood or more a socioeconomically disadvantaged neighborhood, which unfortunately correlates to the amount of greenery or parks or gardens that are available in that area. And here's an illustration of a study of just showing how plants and shade that they provide can really lead to urban cooling, just to kind of scientifically prove a point here. Stormwater management in areas that are prone to flooding. A soil can act as a natural sponge, so it can really help reduce surface runoff and erosion. Obviously, this, again, it needs to be at scale and is better probably in in-ground gardens or larger gardens that actually can provide that surface area for areas that are flood prone. But it's just a very good option as well, especially for flood prone areas. Ooh, skipped a couple. Here, biodiversity is another one that's really important, again, to bring into this picture. On the left is a video of the first bee that visited the garden. It's on a mint plant that I let go to seed. So it flowered and the bees were obsessed with it. And I put it right next to the cucumber plant. So it actually pollinated the cucumber plant while it was hanging out on the mint. So just supporting the beneficial insects, especially just looking around your area if there's not flowers or plants that flower around, just thinking of like how far do urban bees need to fly to get pollen is kind of incredible. So making sure that you are playing a role in supporting those insects, providing them with pollen, and also water sources. So having things like water features for birds is incredibly important, especially in heat waves. As the climate is changing. And also promoting natural pest control. So the video on the right here is from when I released 15,000 ladybugs. Doesn't want to play now. 15,000 ladybugs into my tiny garden. You can buy them online and keep them in the fridge for up to 2 weeks, which is a little bit crazy to me. Ladybugs are a great predator for aphids and spider mites and a lot of different pests that can desecrate your garden. And by releasing them, you kind of are trying to convince them to have to engage in a buffet before they fly away. It was moderately successful. I will say most of them flew away within 24 hours, but they did take some aphids with them. So that was great. So just sometimes you don't have to even do anything. Sometimes you have natural predators in an ecosystem that's a little bit more natural than a balcony that can take care of some of the issues you're having in the garden. Community resilience is an important topic here as well. Of gardens can bring together people and communities, provide social connection, education, especially important in areas where there's food deserts, where the fresh produce is not available in stores. I think something that really needs to be improved based on this data that I found, that most gardeners are actually in the higher income brackets. which is fantastic. But a lot of lower income communities could probably really benefit from having more community gardens or just having more access to space and education or support, or just being encouraged to grow their own food to help improve their nutrition and all of the benefits that you have of having a garden. And again, bringing down the temperature of those areas as well that tend to be hotter just because there's not as much parks or canopy cover. Health is a huge aspect here as well, of just if you're eating things that are just picked, you have the absolute maximum nutritional value and freshness and taste. Actually, nothing tastes better than a freshly picked strawberry from your own garden. Part of it is just because you grew it yourself, and part of it is because it is the ripest and highest nutritional value. Most food in stores is picked way too early and kind of ripened in not ideal conditions. So we've kind of forgotten how things taste like. So tomatoes from the store are kind of awful most of the time. And we have unrealistic expectations of food being at its highest quality and nutritional value, even if it's produced in the way that it is produced commercially. So by growing your own food, you actually get the taste and nutritional value of real produce. And it helps with mental health, it helps with gut health, unique nutrients and variety that you can maybe not get from the store, and also helps just improve physical activity, just being in the garden, having, again, that kind of peace of mind, and just the actual activity of kneeling and taking care of something. There's even a Netflix show right now that's following people who live a very long time in different cultures, like in Japan. And they were saying that something like staying moderately active in gardening, or something like working a trade or craft, helps people live longer. So that's there's a great benefit to starting a garden right there. Food education is a huge one as well. So gardens provide an opportunity to fix this disconnect of where food comes from, and accepting ugly produce, managing expectations as to seasonality and variety, and again, taste is a huge one in here as well. Which brings us to food waste. And I know there's a whole lecture on food waste coming up, so I won't dive too deep into this, but obviously it's a huge problem for just in general, if we don't want to be wasting food, since there's so many communities in the world that don't have access to fresh food. Or enough food just in general. But also food waste leads to emissions and all of the problems related to managing landfill and transportation. So by managing from reducing your food waste, but also then composting what food waste you do have, is a great way to incorporate sustainability with gardening as well, because then you can put the compost directly into your soil and grow new food. And I have some types of composting here, of whether you have a yard, or there's indoor options of a bokashi bin, which is a Japanese system, or some electronic devices, which are not true composters, but do help kind of process food waste into something like compost, or there's pickup drop-off services in certain areas. So there's a lot of options. And I think people do get overwhelmed when they look into composting for the very first time. There's all these rules, but basically it comes down to how much space you have, what kind of waste you produce, what do you want to do with the compost? Do you want to put it in your garden or not? How much of an ick tolerance do you have? Are you okay with worms, for example, or not? What is available or allowed in your area? And how much money do you want to spend? Because some of the indoor composters actually do cost a lot of money. So you can have just like a pile of stuff in your yard to having like a fancy gadget in your kitchen. There's a wide variety, and I can share a link to this flow chart after the session, which can kind of help you decide what would work well for you. So in summary, just to finish up here and go into Q&A, I think everyone can grow something, whatever space you have or think you don't have, don't be afraid. Gardening can provide a ton of benefits for you personally, for your community, and hopefully over time with enough scale for the planet. There are tons of different ways to garden. There's a format and scale that works for everyone, and kind of change your mindset of, I hear this so much of like, oh no, I don't have a green thumb. I can't do it. I don't know how. Nobody really knows how when they first start out, and just kind of changing that mindset of experimenting and learning and watching, the natural ecosystem evolve. It's something magical, and it's just, if you allow yourself to experience that, it can really help you overcome that roadblock. And just to finish up, since I do have kind of a wider lens of sustainability, I'm also the founder of an organization called Zemlia, which is a sustainability action catalyst. And we are building a database, interactive tool, and a consultancy that's going to try to solve the problem of individual action across all areas of life, not just your garden, not even just your home, but just everything that you deal with on a daily basis. To try to have a positive, inclusive, data-driven approach to this. And if you're interested in that, you can go on our website and contact me, and we can discuss some more of how you'd like to be involved. But just wanted to throw that out there. This is an early stage startup, but we're very excited to try to help people in this space. So I will finish up with just my contact information. So I do offer garden consultancy. So if anybody's interested in getting started, but still kind of overwhelmed and like some help, or maybe gardening for a while and not sure how to improve, go on our website, email me. There's Instagram, there's LinkedIn. Contact me in various ways. Let me know if you want to collaborate in some way. Maybe there's like a school project. There's so many different ways that gardening can become a part of your life. So let me know. And thank you so much for listening. Hopefully this was helpful, and really excited to get to your questions.
Thank you, Anya. I personally felt much more relaxed just hearing about your topic, and I love the slides that you created. They're so colorful, and the illustrations are really, really sweet. So thank you for providing all that information, including your personal journey. Really interesting. Just to start off with some questions, I did notice that somebody wanted a little bit more information, perhaps some suggestions about edible perennials. So do you have any thoughts about maybe some species that you might recommend?
Interesting. I mean, there's so much, and it really does depend on your area and what again what your goals are and what you're looking for. I prefer, I grow kind of the same thing every year, but then always have something special in my repertoire of like something I've never, again, like never eaten before or never heard of before. So I typically have too many tomato plants is what I usually do. I do, kale salad, chard, and then strawberries I think are my absolute favorite thing to have constantly in the garden, but because I move around so much, I need that flexibility of not having as many perennials, of having that annual turnover as much. But I think in terms of like something that I've always had is probably strawberries, but it really depends again on your area, what you can grow and what you want to grow. I'll say. So that's something that is I need a little more information to give a better recommendation there, but definitely thinking about your goals, I think it's a good place to start.
Great. Yes, I think that was a question from Judy. So if Judy, if you have other information that you want to provide, please add it to the chat or the Q&A. I know personally that fruit trees are really exciting if you have the space for it, because they're good at sequestering carbon, and they're also really yummy. So another question I had was when you showed that video of your balcony being transformed into a sea of green and all the other balconies were not, I'm curious if you have noticed anyone coming to you and saying, I'd like to know more about your garden, or have you influenced anyone through kind of rubbing elbows with neighbors who are able to see your garden? What's the reaction of some of those people?
Yeah, that's a great question. I did actually post a couple of times in our community portal of being like, hey, have you looked up at the building recently and saw the craziness on the 12th floor? And I did have a couple of people reach out for various reasons. Nobody followed through. Somebody said that like it's just not good timing, like maybe they're thinking of moving. Somebody started and then kind of got discouraged. So there is again, like thinking about the roadblocks that people have, it feels like such a huge undertaking. I'm going to start a garden, like, oh, I need to buy all these things and I need to commit time. And it seems so overwhelming to people. So what I do try to offer, and again, I mean, I'm limited, if consultancy can be, a one consultation and done, and then it's kind of up to you, or do you want to kind of like have that ongoing help? I really prefer that ongoing help, but that's not something that people a lot of the times prefer. So it really is something for everyone, and you can really adjust it to what you need. But with that, I will say, like, I do not recommend starting with just one tomato plant. A lot of people who have that hesitancy, and some of the people that I've talked to in the building, they're like, oh, I'll just start with one, I'll see how it goes. I'm like, it will go in the fall. Like, you'll have a tomato plant, nothing will happen to it for 60 days. You will forget about it. It will die, and then you will never grow anything again because you'll think it's your fault. Like, you have to start. It's a balance, right? Like, you want something to always be happening in your garden, so that you need a certain level of scale, so you have at least some things be successful, and you can kind of grow from there. But it's not one plant, so it is a little bit of almost like therapy, in a way of like being like, it's okay, your plant may die, but it's not your fault. Like, working with people to try to get them to start is so incredibly hard. But I'm hoping that through just kind of having it out there, like, as I said, you can see it on the highway. So I don't know, maybe people driving by would be like, what is that? And maybe they're get inspired. I'm trying to do that through the Instagram channel of being like, this is possible. It's not that hard. It's not too much work. So hopefully there's a little bit of a hidden effect, but so far it's been a little difficult convincing people.
Thank you. So a couple of the questions trickling into the Q&A have to do with watering. You
Mm.
mentioned specifically the challenges of not having an easy water supply out there. So what do you recommend for that kind of thing? And then Pierce also has a follow-up question about how do you deal with water draining out of the garden? Do you have to accommodate that somehow?
Yeah, those are great questions. I just have a watering can. I have not thought of a better system. We don't have any sort of watering source anywhere close to the garden. The only other thing I can think of is running like a hose from the kitchen through the entire house, which I just don't think is practical. That was my plan A, but that got shot down by by my husband. So I just have a watering can, and I've reframed it to exercise, getting my steps in of like running back and forth to the bathroom and filling this watering can on a daily basis. Like, it's exercise, it's part of that like physical activity and well-being. So it's definitely something to manage. I mean, some balconies, that's just my balcony. Some balconies might have, a faucet or something easier, or be open. I do have an actual like the next balcony above me. So even if it rains, I don't get any water. I have to water every day, which is kind of crazy thinking about Portland that it's like pouring and I'm standing there watering this garden, just insane. So there's definitely things that I think, depending on your layout, depending on whether you have a roof or not, a water source. Drainage, we don't have a drain here either. I know I've had balconies before that have drains. My balcony is actually on a little bit of a slant, so it just drains out, which is weird, because like when you put the raised beds, like you can see that they're slanted. So even as I'm watering, the water is like running off of the balcony. So I haven't done too much of like actually having a drainage system. And I do actually have two layers of, I have the raised beds, but they have a bottom, but it's not a solid bottom. So I do actually have plants on the lower tier that need more shade, that actually get watered from the drainage, as like the beds drain off. So there's kind of a complementary drainage system to the plants, but it usually doesn't like flood from the balcony just because it's so covered. But great questions.
Yeah, and I believe that if a soil is more fertile or, has a lot of organic matter, that drainage is probably slower than if you had like a really poor soil or something like that.
Yeah, and elevated raised beds are actually really interesting because you have to put potting soil in it, because you can't have them be too heavy. If you use your normal compost and topsoil, as anybody has tried to lift those things in Home Depot, they are so heavy. And you can't put them in elevated raised beds because they'll basically just fall through the bottom. Just the soil will be too heavy. So you actually need to use potting soil, which kind of impacts the water retention. So it's a balance for sure of like, you want the water to be retained, but not too much. So I've definitely kind of adjusted the beds throughout the season. But again, like, it's the first season. So every time you implement a new system, you have to adjust and iterate. But that's definitely been an interesting mix, that you have to incorporate potting soil because it's basically a big container.
Yeah, I'm very much inspired by your telling us how you have to keep learning things all the time. You're adjusting. I think that's a really wonderful lesson. So Katie has a question about squirrels. I suppose you probably don't have as many squirrels on the 12th floor, but in a lot of gardens, those are a common kind of pest and nuisance. How do you deal with squirrels?
Yes, I've had a war with squirrels. And then in Syracuse, it was a groundhog that got into my garden once and basically ate half of the garden overnight. And there was a very intense fencing operation that happened the next day of like, I was like, oh my God, we are putting out like barbed wire. This is not happening. So for squirrels, yeah, squirrels are mean. They will sit and eat your tomato while making eye contact with you, of just like they'll bite it and they'll just like throw it and just like make eye contact, but they're like, what? So yeah, feelings about squirrels. I've basically built cages for the tomatoes. And I'm actually not, speaking of cages, don't put your tomatoes in tomato cages. I don't know who invented tomato cages. Support your tomatoes from the stem. If you're thinking about your core as a human being, like if you need to support yourself, you would support your core, not the periphery. So I use bamboo sticks and just tie tomato plants to that. Most tomatoes do not need support on the periphery unless you're like growing extraordinarily huge heirloom tomatoes. So just side note. But I've basically built out of fencing, I've built cages that is basically an entire cage around a tomato section that keeps the squirrels out. That's the only thing I've been able to do. Depending on how vicious they are, I've had to do that in New Jersey because they were just stealing like every single tomato. Otherwise, I would just, if you're kind of more generous, you can plant more tomatoes, just assuming that you will lose some. And that is another kind of philosophy of gardening of like, you are also providing for the ecosystem. You're not just like, oh, flowers for the bees, but you're also growing food that, you know, otherwise that squirrel might be eating trash or something, you know, maybe they're really hungry. And you can also like reframe that as like, okay, there'll be some loss, but I'll also get a lot of benefit. So there's different ways of like, you can be like super, I'm like, I am owning every single tomato. And you can even buy little produce bags and like literally cover each and every tomato and tie it so they can't get to it. That's one end of the spectrum. And then there's like a more generous kind of like philosophical approach of like, it's okay. We all live here. We all need to eat. So it depends on where you fall on that, I think.
That makes sense. So a more philosophical question, since you were using that word. Do you have any gardening heroes that you look up to and have inspired you to where you are now?
That's a good question. I do follow a lot of people on Instagram. My certification as a garden consultant comes from Gardenary. I can drop that link when we share the resources as well. And the founder of that, her name's Nicole. She's definitely been very inspirational in that like troublemaker, rule breaker kind of way. She kind of introduced me to the idea of very tight planting and kind of breaking spacing rules. And I guess maybe this is a good time to, I've kind of dropped it a couple of times, but this is one of the most basic things that I try to teach every single person I've ever talked to about gardening is when you read the seed packets and it says that you need 12 inches in between plants. They mean, first of all, on center. So they mean 6 inches on each side, not 12 inches between each plant. And that also is more geared towards farmers that plant in rows. So when you have a 2x4 raised bed like I do, that makes absolutely no sense for you to be planting rows of corn. You're not planting that, so you don't need to think about the row ratio. You basically just need to know how big is the plant going to be and how much nutrients and depth does it need to thrive. And then you can plant smaller things around it, like things like flowers, things like herbs, don't need like any space. And if you're planting root crops or planting things on the surface, you can also try to plan that and plant really, really tight. And plants actually seem to thrive more through that. And you basically also don't have weeds because there's no room. So the idea that Nicole kind of really teaches through the consultancy, like she teaches how to people who want to be garden consultants how to do that, but she also teaches how to garden. And that's one of the things I really loved from her teaching is if there's a weed there, there's enough space for a plant to grow. So plant something there that is not a weed that you actually will eat, because obviously like that plant is growing there, so there's room and nutrients, but you don't want that. You want like other stuff. So plant as densely as you can. And some things will succeed and not others. I mean, it's again a learning process, and you'll kind of get a sense for that over time. But like, don't grow weeds, and especially don't plant like I did in that first picture of like broccoli plant, and then like you have all these weeds and you have to then put mulch and grass clippings and then pick weeds, and it just doesn't make any sense. So just plant tightly, and just also understand of like, what do you actually want to grow that is going to take up that much room. Like broccoli takes up so much room, even if you plant tightly and then you get one broccoli out of it. Like, is that worth it? Or you get one tomato plant that's also huge, but then you get like 40 tomatoes out of it. So, like, what are your goals? Again, do you want love broccoli, worth investing, worth like the foot of space, or do you not want that? You know, can get broccoli from the store or from the farmer's market.
Wonderful. I think we have time for one more question, so I will ask Pamela's question, which is any suggestions for a shadier patio?
Ooh, yes. I so depending on the season also, kale does shade okay. Chard does okay in shade. Also depends on the type. So like when you're looking at seed packets, it will usually say, but again, like thinking of what they mean by shade versus full sun is important for your context as well. Of like, I put things in full sun on the 12th floor balcony. And as I mentioned before, like what full sun means on the 12th floor is not what full sun means in your backyard. Like I put things out and they burnt to a crisp as if I set them on fire because it's never experienced full sun in that way. So also what does shade mean? Like does shade mean like there's absolutely no sun, or like part sun? Like does it get any direct sun, or is it all part sun, like shade constantly? It'll vary, but lettuce, you can do like lettuce I've had on the second tier, as I mentioned, like under my beds, so they're literally shaded by the beds themselves. um Lots of, yeah, lettuces, like greens, not things that are fruit. Basically fruiting takes a lot of energy for the plant, so usually things that fruit will need full sun, but more of like leafy greens, and like maybe basil could even probably do, depending again how much shade. Those kind of plants could do really well.
Wow, thank you so much for all the knowledge you've given us. And I'm really excited to hopefully this will spur a lot of people to pursue gardening who were maybe a little bit anxious before or worried about it. So thank you again for joining us. And we'll be sending out an email with more resources and more links for you all. And thank you, Anya.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for all the great questions. Again, if you want to follow up, I'd be happy to provide more kind of like specific recommendations. Again, because it really depends on your area and your goals. But otherwise, yeah, really, really great opportunity, and appreciate all of the work that Acterra does for supporting, sustainability in general.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll definitely put your contact info in the email as well so people can reach out with more questions. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Have a good rest of your afternoon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.